Most people think of classical music as a non-political art form, but in the 19th and 20th centuries, classical music has been subject to censorship in virtually every type of political system, from monarchist to fascist to communist to democratic. This project reviews examples of censorship of classical music in the last 200 years as composers and performers have been censored for who they are and what they believe. We will review a history of censorship from the way royal courts attempted to edit operas to the way selected composers were either promoted or silenced by communist and fascist governments, to the way present-day performances are sometimes canceled in the name of political correctness. All of these examples show that music's capacity to stir emotions makes it a frequent target for censorship.
The reign of Adolf Hitler's Third Reich was one of the most monumental regimes of the 20th century. To briefly summarize, Hitler gained control of a deprived Germany, a country plagued with financial depression and the thoughts of the First World War still in the minds of many. One of the first things he does is sets up the Ministry of Propaganda, led by Joseph Goebbels. The job of the Ministry of Propaganda was to regulate the culture and mass media of Nazi Germany, and one of the many things to fall in this category is music. What's appropriate and what's not. To support his Reich, Hitler made sure through Goebbels what music was appropriate for his empire and what was immoral. Goebbels sets up the Reichsmusikkammer, translated variously as Reich Music Chamber, State Music Institute, or State Music Bureau, to be in charge of music that was acceptable and not acceptable in the Third Reich. As much as Hitler and Goebbels approved of composers of their homeland, there are many who were outright banned. The works of greats such as Felix Mendelssohn and Gustav Mahler were banned due to the fact that they were Jewish composers. Although still respected by some Germans, the Ministry of Propaganda forbade public performances of works of Jewish composers. Other composers weren't just banned because of their faith. The music of Igor Stravinsky, Alban Berg, Arnold Schoenberg, and composers associated with the Expressionist period were swiftly banned. Music of this nature was deemed by the Nazis as subversive and degenerate music. Although many types of orchestra music were either accepted or unaccepted by the Third Reich, there was still a genre of music that was outright banned from the government: popular jazz and swing music. Nega music, Negro music, is what this music was called by the Nazis, and it too was deemed degenerate. In 1928, Kurt Weill, a German composer of both chamber music as well as the works for the stage, composed Die Drei Groschen Oper, the Threepenny Opera, a modernized version of the historical Beggar's Opera. The show's music combined German musical themes with the new jazz music that was all the rage. Due to the rise of Nazi reign in the early 1930s, he fled the country. The song, Mac the Knife, from this production is now a jazz standard.
The Italian Risorgimento, or reform from a loose collection of sovereign city-states to a unified country, was political progress that was desired by the general populace but denied by the large European powers of the time. The great opera composer Giuseppe Verdi illustrated the revolutionary ideals of the people through thematic elements in his works, and was met repeatedly with conflicts from censors who desired to limit the spread of such ways of thinking. Verdi was born in 1813 in Le Roncole, and at a young age showed a talent and love for music. He became the paid organist at his church at the age of 8 and went on to study at the local Philharmonic Society. It was there that he was encouraged to debut his first opera. Despite facing hardships, Verdi pursued his art and became somewhat of a voice of the political discontent in Italy with his third opera. This position was not easy, as under the rule of the Austrian Empire and the Catholic Church, officials forced him to change lyrics and scenes in his operas that implied a revolution. In Nabucco, the line, "May the foreigner die," initiating the captive Hebrews' fight against the god of the Egyptians, was forcibly changed to, "May you show us your will." Imagery of the captives breaking their shackles was deleted. Giovanna d'Arco's thematic usage of the Virgin Mary was updated to avoid references to sexuality or symbolism for Italian independence. The final act of Macbeth opens with the chorus of the oppressed land, which was promptly changed to the beloved land. In perhaps his largest censorship conflict, Verdi's greatest opera, Rigoletto, was almost denied performance at the Theatre of Venice due to lewd depictions of the French King Francis I. The setting of the play was changed to Italy instead of France, and the king into a respectable man. Although Verdi's true role in the unification movement is often debated by scholars, he serenaded the political shift with his entire life's work. Censors saw the composer's potential to spread revolutionary thinking, and they clipped his wings to keep him from becoming the influence to the Risorgimento that he could have been.
The examples of censorship we've already talked about were all in societies where the government tried to control the arts for political purposes. Most people think that in free democratic countries you would not find censorship, but they would be wrong. Perhaps the most famous example of censorship in a democratic society is the ban of Wagner's music in Israel. But this is not an official government censorship. In fact, Wagner is often played on public radio in Israel. Instead, this ban stems from a decision made by the Palestine Symphony in 1938 after Hitler's first raids on Jewish ghettos. The Israel Philharmonic has continued the tradition of not playing Wagner's music since then. On a few rare occasions, performances of Wagner's work have been attempted, and there is always public outcry. Audience members have even run onto the stage to try to stop the music from being played. Because of Wagner's anti-Semitic writings and his popularity in Nazi Germany, most Israelis believe playing Wagner's music is offensive, especially to Holocaust survivors. Israel's ban on Wagner shows how most examples of classical music censorship happen in free democracies. Public opinion forces arts organizations like symphonies and opera houses to cancel performances. The politics of the composer or performer can effectively lead to a ban on their music, even if the music itself has no political content. This fear of offending the audience has motivated many recent examples of censorship. In 2015, the Toronto Symphony canceled a performance of Chopin's music by Ukrainian pianist Valentina Listica because she supported the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. In 2014, the Western Australian Opera canceled performances of Carmen because the smoking in the story offended a health company that sponsored the opera house. And in England in 2011, Opera North canceled the premiere of a new opera called Beached when parents of schoolchildren in the production objected to the inclusion of a gay character. In the United States, some controversial recent examples of censorship center around an opera written in 1991 named The Death of Klinghoffer. The opera tells the true story of the 1985 hijacking of a cruise ship by Palestinian terrorists. During the hijacking, they killed an elderly wheelchair-bound Jewish man named Leon Klinghoffer, shooting him and then throwing him overboard. The opera is told from the Palestinians' point of view. In October 2001, just after the September 11th attacks, the Boston Symphony canceled a performance of excerpts from the opera. When he announced the cancellation, the symphony director said he wanted to err on the side of being sensitive. Then in 2015, the Metropolitan Opera canceled a worldwide live simulcast of a performance of The Death of Klinghoffer, after loud protests, death threats to opera management, and picketing at the opera house. Many music critics supported these decisions, one even arguing that a voluntary cancellation out of consideration for people's feelings is not actually censorship. But many others in the media and music world criticized the cancellations, saying censorship is never justified and that it is important to perform the provocative work to promote discussion. The Metropolitan Opera tried to take advantage of the controversy, promoting ticket sales with the slogan, "See it, then decide."
After the Second World War, the Soviets, particularly the officials, had desires of forging model young citizens in efforts to legitimize the political system, encourage natalism, and spread the Soviet model throughout the world via Cold War public diplomacy. According to Lenin, every artist, everyone who considers himself an artist, has a right to create freely according to his ideal, independently of everything. However, we are communists and we must not stand with folded hands and let chaos develop as it pleases. We must systematically guide this process and form its results. Lenin wanted to control any type of creation and the people that would ultimately undermine the regime and cause chaos. The Union of Soviet Composers was the main control of all the arts, including music. Its main ideals were about the promotion of socialist realism, which demanded a large amount of nationalism, raising the efforts to bring communist ideology and the regime to a higher level of acceptance, as well as being accessible to the masses. Any composer that deviated from these ideals were alienated. This forced many composers to follow the will of the communist ideology. Other composers chose to leave the Soviet Union to not be constrained. Socialist realism affected post-war Polish music, including jazz, from approximately 1949 to 1955. Religious intolerance played a big role in post-World War II censorship, and which went into the idea of anti-Westernization. In the children's novel Virgin Soil Upturned, references to God making mist out of tears shed by the poor and hungry were condemned.